Mirror's Edge, one of my favorite games of all time. Mirror's Edge is a parkour platformer. You play as Faith, a runner for an underground courier group who delivers sensitive information across a tightly monitored city. The story is okay, but relatively simple with a few plot holes and mainly serves as a break between the parkour sequences that make up most of the game. Despite being released in 2008, the game still looks impressive today. The graphics are detailed and clean, with each area following a distinct color scheme, usually with white as the base highlighted by bold, contrasting colors. Red objects in the environment help guide your path through each level. I especially like the CL shaded cutscenes, which stand out from the rest of the game with their unique graphic novel style. The music is another highlight, perfectly complementing the atmosphere. Released in a time of gray-brown bloom-saturated AAA titles, its stark and colorful visual style made it truly iconic. It still looks amazing to this day, and from the way they handled the engine and lighting, the insanely high-res signs painting screens, over all the little polishes and fun details tell me that the people DICE at this point in time really knew what they were doing. There are AAA games that still have less readable, more mushy text on set dressing today. The gameplay is still good though. From a modern movement shooter perspective, some people may class it as slow. Don't expect Titanfall style wall runs and pace. It's almost more physics-based parkour sim than arcade platformer. It takes some work to get some good flow speed going. The game also really respects you as a player. It never intrudes into the minimalist HUD with belittling pop-ups, barely ever cuts away from gameplay, and when it does, never for the exciting bits. It isn't scared of letting you fail, and frequently makes failing a bone-chilling event. The gameplay is focused on first-person parkour, where you traverse rooftops and buildings at high speeds. The parkour mechanics are generally responsive, though they occasionally miss the mark, such as when Faith fails to grab a ledge or refuses to jump where you want. It's easy to build momentum, but even minor missteps can interrupt the flow, which can make climbing segments feel tedious. The levels are quite short, typically only a few minutes of parkour before a chase sequence kicks in, often with security forces or snipers adding urgency to your escape. I think the game could have benefited from longer sections focused solely on free running. But overall though, Mirror's Edge is an awesome game that still looks great and played good. Batman Arkham Knight. Alright, let's talk about Batman Arkham Knight, a game that hit the streets back in 2015 and somehow still looks like it's taking a swing at modern titles. This was Rocksteady's magnum opus for the Arkham series, and man, did they go all out. The game's visual fidelity is bonkers even today. You've got Gotham City drenched in rain, neon lights bouncing off wet streets, and that gritty, atmospheric fog rolling in like the city itself is alive. And let's not forget the Batmobile. Love it or hate it gameplay-wise, you can't deny it looks sleek. The texture work, the reflections, the little mechanical animations when you switch to tank mode, it's a chef's kiss. Even Batman's cape, yes. A cape was groundbreaking with how it ripples and folds realistically as you glide across rooftops or get into a brawl. Speaking of brawls, those combat animations. Still smoother than a silk suit, Arkham Knight wasn't just about photorealism, it was about creating a vibe. The way light interacts with every surface, from the cracked tiles and abandoned subway stations to the metallic glint of Batman's armor, is top tier. The crazy part? This game still holds its own on current gen hardware. Crank it up to max settings on a PC or next gen console, and you'll be wondering how this game came out almost a decade ago. Sure, the gameplay has its debates, but visually, it's a masterpiece. It's one of those games you fire up just to marvel at the art direction and maybe do a few dive bombs off Wayne Tower while you're at it. If you haven't revisited Gotham in a while, trust me, Arkham Knight still has that wow factor.
Well, that's made things a little more interesting.
Assassin's Creed Unity. Alright, let's talk about Assassin's Creed Unity, the game that may have had a rocky launch, but let's give credit where it's due. This thing is still drop dead gorgeous. Released back in 2014, it's insane how well it holds up, especially when you consider how much detail Ubisoft crammed into 18th century Paris. The city is the real MVP here. The narrow cobblestone streets, the towering cathedrals, the bustling marketplaces, it all feels alive. The lighting? Oh man, it's on another level. Sunrise over the Seine or golden hour light hitting the Notre Dame is just chef's kiss. You'll probably catch yourself just wandering around, taking in the views instead of stabbing some Templar. And can we talk about the interiors? Unity wasn't messing around when it introduced fully explorable buildings. You could climb into a lavish ballroom lit by chandeliers, complete with NPCs twirling around, then head to a grimy tavern that feels like it smells of spilled ale and regret. The textures, the tiny environmental details, every corner of Paris feels handcrafted. Arno's outfits, the weapons, even the crowd's Unity made sure everything looks stunning. The animations, especially during combat, still have this fluidity that makes slicing through enemies feel extra satisfying. And those parkour moves? Still some of the best in the series, with the added bonus of the game letting you climb down gracefully instead of awkwardly jumping to your doom. Sure. Unity had its share of bugs at launch, remember the floating eyeballs? Yikes, but now, with patches and hardware that can handle it, this game shines. If you boot it up today, you'll wonder how they managed to make it look so ahead of its time. For anyone who loves historical settings with jaw-dropping visuals, Unity is a must-see even now.
There she is.
Crysis 3. When it comes to games that still look incredible, Crysis 3 is an absolute no-brainer. Released in 2013, it feels like Crytek was aiming not just for the hardware of the time, but for the future. Even now, over a decade later, it's the kind of game that can make you pause just to admire what's on screen. The setting is a big part of why it holds up. That fusion of nature reclaiming the cityscape creates this stunning blend of lush greenery and crumbling urban ruins. The overgrown jungle wrapped around New York City's skyscrapers. It's not just cool to look at, it's downright immersive. You've got sunlight streaming through leaves, glinting off water puddles, and casting shadows that feel alive. It's a visual treat that's hard to top. Prophet's nanosuit is another highlight. The intricate details on the suit still look sharp, with textures that make it feel tangible. Watching raindrops bead and roll off the armor, or seeing it shimmer under light adds this layer of realism that's crazy even by today's standards. But it's not just about the big stuff, the little things sell the world too. Grass bends and sways naturally as you move, water reacts when you wade through it, and explosions light up areas with such intensity it feels like you're there. This is the kind of game where every corner of the map feels like it was designed to wow you. And let's not forget the gameplay, using the Predator bow and stealthy jungle sections or going all out with the nanosuit's abilities feels just as satisfying as it did at launch. The visuals don't just look pretty, they complement the action perfectly, making every encounter feel cinematic. Even now, Crysis 3 isn't just a visual benchmark, it's a reminder of how forward-thinking game design can create something timeless. It's the kind of game you can revisit and still be amazed. Ryse, Son of Rome. If there's one game that still turns heads years later, it's Ryse, Son of Rome. Released in 2013 as a launch title for the Xbox One, Crytek made sure this game was all about showing off what next-gen hardware could do at the time. Fast forward to now, and Ryse still looks ridiculously good, like borderline unfair to newer games good. Let's start with the visuals. Ancient Rome in Ryse feels like it was pulled straight out of a Hollywood blockbuster. The attention to detail is insane. From the architecture to the meticulously designed armor, every texture looks like someone spent weeks perfecting it. Walking through Roman streets or storming beaches during battles, you can't help but feel like you're in a Ridley Scott movie. The lighting deserves a special shout out too. Sunlight pours through columns, gleams off shields, and catches the golden details of Centurion helmets in a way that just screams next level in the environments. They're cinematic. Forests, battlegrounds, palaces, everything feels massive and alive with a sense of scale that's still impressive. But the real stars of Ryse are the character models. The facial animations in particular were groundbreaking for the time, and honestly they still hold up today. Whether it's the subtle expressions of a grieving soldier or the over-the-top arrogance of a Roman general, the characters feel lifelike in a way that makes the story hit harder. Sure, the gameplay leaned a little too heavily on quick-time events and repetitive combat, but the presentation made it all worthwhile. Watching Marius slice through enemies in brutal cinematic executions is as smooth and satisfying now as it was on day one. Ryse might have been a mixed bag for some in terms of gameplay, but visually, it's a masterpiece. Whether you're revisiting it on PC or firing it up on an Xbox, it's a reminder that Crytek knows how to push the limits of hardware. Rise of the Tomb Raider. When it comes to games that still impress visually, Rise of the Tomb Raider is a standout. Released in 2015, it was one of those games that felt like a massive leap forward, and even today, it's hard to believe it's almost a decade old. Crystal Dynamics didn't just create a game, they crafted an experience that feels as visually immersive now as it did then. Let's start with the environments. From the frozen Siberian wilderness to the lush hidden valleys, every location is packed with detail. The snow crunches realistically underfoot, icicles glisten in the sunlight, and the way Lara interacts with her surroundings, whether she's wading through water or climbing icy cliffs, still feels lifelike. The lighting system is top tier with dynamic shadows and flickering torchlight adding an extra layer of realism to those eerie caves and ancient tombs. And then there's Lara herself. The character model is stunningly detailed, from the dirt and snow that stick to her clothing during her adventures to the subtle facial expressions that bring her emotions to life. It's not just about how good she looks, it's how her animations flow seamlessly with the action, making everything from combat to climbing feel fluid and natural. Speaking of combat, the particle effects in Rise of the Tomb Raider are still impressive. Whether it's the sparks flying off an exploding barrel or the fine dust settling after a rock slide, the game nails those little details that pull you deeper into the world. But what really sets this game apart is how timeless its art direction feels. It's not just a pretty game, it's a game with a strong sense of place. Every tomb you explore, every campfire you rest at feels intentional and rich with atmosphere. Even now, revisiting Rise of the Tomb Raider feels like stepping into a cinematic adventure. It's a reminder that great visuals don't just age well, they stick with you.
Essa nova segurança não é brincadeira. Mas preciso do acesso. Descobrir quem está atrás da minha família.
Watch Dogs. When Watch Dogs dropped in 2014, it was hyped as a glimpse into the future of open world games, and while the initial buzz was a mixed bag, there's no denying one thing: visually, this game still holds up. Ubisoft's rendition of Chicago is packed with detail, and even today, it feels alive and immersive in a way that few games from that era can match. The city itself is the star here, whether it's late night rain slicking the streets, neon signs reflecting off puddles, or the moody fog rolling in over the skyline. Watch Dogs nails the urban aesthetic. You can feel the grit of Chicago's back alleys and the sleek, modern vibe of its downtown skyscrapers. That dynamic weather system, it's still a standout, especially when you're driving through a downpour with headlights cutting through the mist. Then there's Aiden Pierce. His animations, like the way he pulls up his iconic trench coat collar in the wind or flicks his baton during combat, add a grounded feel to the character. Sure, Aiden might not be the most charismatic protagonist, but visually, he's got that gritty anti-hero vibe nailed. The hacking effects are another thing that still impresses. From the flickering glitches of hacked cameras to the way lights flicker when you overload a junction box, it all feels sharp and impactful. Even the way the game overlays digital text and markers on the real world was ahead of its time, giving it this sleek, cyberpunk light aesthetic. And let's not forget the lighting and shadows. Whether you're stalking through the streets at night or perched on a rooftop scoping out your next target, the way light interacts with the environment is incredible. Combine that with the dense crowds and flowing traffic, and the city feels vibrant, like it's constantly moving, even if you're standing still. Watch Dogs may not have lived up to all of its gameplay promises, but visually, it delivered something that still feels fresh. It's one of those games you can fire up years later, take a slow walk through Chicago, and just soak it all in.
Tipo de contrato como motorista.
BioShock Infinite. Let's talk about BioShock Infinite, a game that doesn't just look good, it's absolutely unforgettable. Released in 2013, it may not have aimed for hyper-realistic graphics, but its art direction was so strong that it still holds up as one of the most visually stunning games ever made. Columbia, the floating city in the sky, is the real showstopper here. From the moment you step into its sunlit streets, you're hit with this surreal, dreamlike vibe. The bright blue skies, the golden glow of the buildings, and the ridiculously detailed architecture, all of it works together to create a world that feels alive yet otherworldly. It's the kind of place you'll want to stop and just look around. The lighting is another highlight. The way the sun bathes everything in a soft glow, or how fireworks light up the sky during a festival, is pure magic. Even the darker, more chaotic parts of the game have this cinematic quality, with moody shadows and glowing embers floating in the air after a battle. And then there's the character design. Elizabeth, with her expressive face and dynamic animations, is one of the most lifelike and endearing companions in gaming. The way her hair moves in the wind, or how her eyes light up when she discovers something new, adds so much to the experience. Even the enemies, like the mechanical patriots and the eerie songbird, are packed with personality and visual flair. Combat also benefits from the game's visuals. The vigors you use, like shooting lightning or summoning a murder of crows, are not just powerful but visually stunning. The particle effects, the way the environment reacts, it all feels polished and satisfying. What really makes BioShock Infinite timeless, though, is the sheer creativity of its world. Columbia isn't just pretty, it's a place brimming with stories, hidden details, and atmosphere. Even now, revisiting it feels like stepping into a living, breathing work of art. This one's a classic, and it's easy to see why it still gets so much love. The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. If we're talking about games that still look stunning, The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt has to be near the top of the list. Released in 2015, this game set a new benchmark for open world visuals, and even years later, it still feels like a masterpiece. Whether you're riding through sunlit meadows or battling monsters in a storm, CD Projekt Red crafted a world that feels alive, immersive, and jaw-droppingly gorgeous. Let's start with the environments. The continent is packed with variety. You've got the rolling fields and dense forests of Velen, the misty marshlands dotted with crumbling ruins, and the vibrant, storybook beauty of Toussaint from the Blood and Wine expansion. Each region feels distinct, and the level of detail is just absurd. From scattered wildflowers to windswept hills, it's the kind of world you can get lost in just by wandering. And then there's the weather and lighting. The dynamic weather system is still one of the best out there. A sudden rainstorm turns dirt roads into muddy tracks, lightning splits the sky during storms, and sunsets. Don't even get me started. Watching the sky turn orange and pink as you trot on roads through a quiet village is pure magic. The monster designs also deserve a mention. Every creature, from the terrifying Leshens to the grotesque water hags, is dripping with detail and creativity. The way they're animated and integrated into the world makes every fight feel like a cinematic moment. What really sets The Witcher 3 apart, though, is how the visuals work with the storytelling. It's not just about pretty landscapes, it's about creating an atmosphere. Whether you're exploring a desolate battlefield under a gray sky or enjoying a festival in a lively village, the visuals pull you deeper into the world. Even today, with mods or next-gen updates, this game is a visual feast. It's no surprise people keep coming back to it. It's just that good. Middle-earth Shadow of Mordor. Alright, let's talk about Middle-earth: Shadow of Mordor, a game that came out in 2014 and still manages to look and feel incredible in so many ways. Sure, the visuals are fantastic, we'll get to that, but what really makes this game unforgettable isn't just how it looks, it's how it plays. First, the graphics. Mordor is dark, gritty, and eerie, but it's also strangely beautiful. From the jagged mountains to the creepy ruins of long-forgotten towers, the world feels like it's oozing with atmosphere. The lighting deserves a shout out too, whether it's the ominous orange glow of a forge or the soft light breaking through clouds. The game nails that epic fantasy but make it dangerous vibe. Now let's talk about the real star here, the Nemesis system. This is where the game really sets itself apart. It's not just a gimmick, it changes the way you play. The idea that enemies remember you, adapt, and even mock you for your past failures is pure genius. Got your butt handed to you by some random orc captain? You'll find them again, only now they're promoted, cocky, and looking for round 2. It's personal, and that's what makes every fight feel meaningful. Speaking of fights, the combat system is a dream for anyone who loves fast, fluid action. It takes cues from the Arkham games, but adds its own brutal flair. Executions are stylishly savage, and stringing together combos while dodging, parrying, and countering feels smooth as butter. Add in abilities like dominating orcs to join your side, and every encounter becomes this chaotic, tactical dance. And let's not forget Talion and Celebrimbor. The whole vengeful ranger fused with an ancient elf-wraith duo is just cool. Their banter adds depth, and the revenge-driven story, while simple, fits perfectly into the brutal world of Mordor. It's not just about defeating Sauron's forces, it's about building your own legend. So yeah, while the graphics are impressive, those rain-soaked ruins still look stunning. Shadow of Mordor isn't just eye candy, it's a game that makes you feel like you're crafting your own epic tale in Middle-earth. If you haven't played it yet, you're missing out on one of the coolest systems gaming has ever seen, and an experience that still holds up beautifully today. Alien Isolation. Let's get into Alien Isolation, a game that proves you don't need to be the newest title on the block to make a huge impression. Released in 2014, this one didn't just look stunning, it mastered atmosphere in a way few games ever have. Seriously, if you want tension, fear, and immersion wrapped into one package, Isolation still delivers in 2024 like it's day one. Visually, the game is a love letter to the original Alien movie. Everything about the Sevastopol space station feels like it was pulled straight out of Ridley Scott's 1979 sci-fi masterpiece. The retro-futuristic design, chunky monitors, analog switches, flickering lights oozes nostalgia while still looking crisp and modern. The lighting deserves special mention here too. The way dim, flickering fluorescence cast eerie shadows in the station's abandoned corridors. It's like the game is actively trying to mess with your nerves. But let's talk gameplay, because Isolation isn't just pretty, it's terrifying. The Xenomorph is the ultimate predator, and it's unlike any AI you've faced before. This thing learns, adapts, and hunts you with terrifying unpredictability. It doesn't just wander around waiting for you to stumble into it, it stalks. The sound of it crawling through vents above you is enough to make you freeze in real life. And then there's the stealth, hiding under tables, crouching behind crates, holding your breath as the Xenomorph sniffs the air just feet away. It's the kind of tension that leaves you sweating. The game constantly keeps you on edge, especially with the limited resources. Those flares and noisemakers aren't just tools, they're lifelines, and using them wisely can mean the difference between survival and a horrifying death. What makes Alien Isolation stand out even today is how perfectly it captures the alien experience. It's not about gunning down hordes of enemies, it's about surviving against an unstoppable force. And let's not forget about the audio design. The creaks of the station, the hum of machinery, and the bone-chilling hiss of the Xenomorph make the world feel alive and like it's actively trying to kill you. Sure, it's gorgeous to look at, but it's the combination of visuals, sound, and sheer dread that makes this game timeless. If you haven't played it yet, turn off the lights, crank up the sound, and prepare to never trust a vent again. Uncharted 4: A Thief's End. Now, here's a game that didn't just raise the bar, it practically vaulted over it. Uncharted 4: A Thief's End, released in 2016, still looks phenomenal, but let's be real, it's not just about the graphics. This game is the full package, blending jaw-dropping visuals with incredible gameplay and one of the most personal, emotional stories in gaming. Let's start with the visuals though, because wow, Naughty Dog pulled out all the stops. From dense, overgrown jungles to sweeping cliffside vistas, the environments in Uncharted 4 feel alive. The Madagascar section, it's like stepping into a National Geographic documentary. The textures are so rich you can almost feel the grit of the dirt tracks or the splash of water as you wade through a stream. And the lighting, perfect. Sunbeams filtering through jungle canopies, reflections bouncing off wet rocks, it's all pure eye candy. Nathan Drake himself is a masterpiece of animation and detail. Every scuff on his boots, every crease in his shirt, and even the way sweat drips down his face during intense moments, it all adds to the immersion. And let's not forget those small touches, like how his hand grazes walls as he squeezes through tight spaces, or the realistic way he stumbles when running down a slope. It's the kind of detail that makes you stop and say they didn't have to go that hard, but they did. But Uncharted 4 isn't just about looking good, it's about telling a great story. This time, it's personal. The dynamic between Nate and his brother Sam adds so much heart to the narrative, and the game's exploration of loyalty, obsession, and letting go is surprisingly mature for a series known for blockbuster action. Speaking of action, it's as cinematic as ever. The shootouts are intense, the puzzles are clever, and the set pieces, unmatched. That car chase in Madagascar might be one of the most thrilling sequences in gaming history. And the grappling hook, oh man, swinging through firefights or launching yourself across chasms never stops being fun. And yet, Uncharted 4 also knows when to slow down. Those quieter moments like Nate and Elena reminiscing over old photos or just wandering through a ruined city give the game a sense of intimacy that sets it apart. So yeah, the visuals are stunning, but Uncharted 4 is more than just a pretty face. It's an epic adventure with soul, a fitting send-off for Nathan Drake that still feels as fresh and exciting today as it did when it launched. Infamous Second Son. Let's talk about Infamous Second Son, a game that launched in 2014 and still feels like a visual showcase, even by today's standards. It was one of the first big exclusives for the PS4, and Sucker Punch used it to flex some serious tech muscles. But it's not just about the graphics. This game had style, personality, and that next-gen feeling we all craved back then. First off, Seattle. The city in Second Son isn't just a backdrop, it's a living, breathing character in its own right. Whether it's the rain-slick streets glistening under neon lights or the clouds parting to reveal a blazing sunset over the Space Needle, the world feels alive. The dynamic weather system and time of day changes aren't just pretty, they give the city a mood. Rainy nights feel moody and tense, while sunny afternoons feel vibrant and full of energy. And then there's Delsin Rowe. As a protagonist, he's brash, sarcastic, and incredibly fun to play as. But visually, the dude looks fantastic. The facial animations are still impressive, capturing every smirk, glare, and emotional beat in a way that pulls you into his story. His iconic red beanie and jean vest combo might be simple, but the level of detail from the stitching on his vest to the way his clothes react to the wind shows how much care went into making him feel real. Now, let's get to the powers, because this is where Second Son really shines. Whether you're hurling neon bolts, zipping through vents in a cloud of smoke, or summoning concrete shards to wreck enemies, every ability is a visual feast. The particle effects are insane, neon glows, smoke swirls, and concrete shards fly with a level of detail that still feels ahead of its time. And the transitions between powers, smooth and stylish, making every move feel like part of a fluid, dynamic dance. Combat and traversal are just as satisfying as they look. Running up buildings, launching into the air, and gliding across rooftops feels effortless, and the game rewards you for exploring its world. Taking down duck checkpoints or tagging walls with graffiti a fun, stylish minigame in itself adds layers to the experience, making you feel like a true rebel in this beautifully oppressive city. Infamous Second Son is more than just a visual showcase. It's a game that oozes personality, blending stunning graphics with fun gameplay and a story that doesn't take itself too seriously but still delivers emotional punches. If you fire it up today, it still feels fresh, vibrant, and just plain cool. The Order 1886. Say what you will about the Order 1886, but one thing's undeniable, it's a visual masterpiece. Released in 2015 as a PS4 exclusive, this game set out to blur the line between gameplay and cinema, and even now, it's a shining example of just how jaw-dropping a game can look. Set in an alternate history Victorian London, The Order takes you on a moody, atmospheric ride through a steampunk-inspired world. The environments are ridiculously detailed, from the cobblestone streets glistening in the rain to the dimly lit interiors filled with ornate furniture and flickering candles. It feels like you're walking through a living painting. But the real standout here is the lighting. The way sunlight filters through smoky air, or how lanterns cast soft, realistic glows on nearby objects, adds an almost tactile quality to the world. The game doesn't just look good, it feels grounded and immersive, like you're right there in the middle of this gritty industrial era fantasy. The character models are on another level too. Sir Galahad and the rest of the knights look absurdly lifelike, with facial animations that still rival some of the best in gaming.
Come on, go! Escaping down!
And the stitching on their uniforms, the subtle sheen of metal on their armor, and even the way their hair moves is all about that next level attention to detail. And while The Order gets some flack for its linear gameplay, what it does well is pacing. The story leans into cinematic presentation, with moments that feel like they're ripped straight out of a big budget movie. The way cutscenes transition seamlessly into gameplay still feels impressive, and when you're in the middle of a firefight, the mix of stylish gunplay and creative weapons like the thermite rifle adds some excitement to the otherwise straightforward mechanics. What really makes The Order 1886 stand out even today is its bold commitment to its aesthetic. It's not just a game, it's an experience. The world building, the steampunk gadgets, the lore surrounding werewolves, and the Knights of the Round Table, it all feels like it belongs to a bigger universe. Sure, it's short, and it leans more into being a cinematic showcase than a deep gameplay experience, but for those few hours, it's a feast for the eyes. If you haven't revisited it, now's the perfect time to remind yourself how far ahead of its time The Order 1886 was in the visual department. Sleeping Dogs. Let's talk about Sleeping Dogs, a game that feels like one of the most underrated gems of its generation. Released in 2012 and later remastered in 2014, this open-world action game still looks and feels fantastic. But the real magic, it's not just the visuals, it's the vibe. Sleeping Dogs nails that gritty, neon-soaked Hong Kong aesthetic and blends it with some of the most satisfying gameplay of its time. First up, the visuals. Even years later, the way Sleeping Dogs brings Hong Kong to life is nothing short of impressive. From the bustling night markets with their glowing red lanterns to the rain-slick streets reflecting neon signs, the city feels alive. It's chaotic, colorful, and packed with detail. Whether you're weaving through alleyways on foot or racing through the city on a motorcycle, it's impossible not to soak in the atmosphere. But what really stands out is how the game makes you feel like a part of this world. NPCs chatter in Cantonese, vendors call out to you, and the city has this layered, lived-in quality that few open-world games manage to pull off. Even small things, like the glow of shop signs or the sound of rain hitting the pavement, add to the immersion. Now let's talk about Wei Shen, because he's a big reason why this game hit so hard. As an undercover cop infiltrating the Triads, Wei's story is packed with tension, loyalty, and betrayal. The game does a fantastic job of making you feel the weight of his choices, balancing his duty as a cop with his growing ties to the criminal underworld. It's one of the few games where the narrative and setting feel perfectly matched. And then there's the combat. Oh man, the combat. Forget generic gunplay. Sleeping Dogs leans into martial arts, and it's glorious. The fighting is fluid and brutal, with combos, counters, and environmental takedowns that make every encounter feel dynamic. Smashing an enemy into a fish tank or slamming them into an air conditioning unit never gets old. The game mixes in just enough variety with gunfights, parkour, and car chases to keep things fresh. Don't sleep on the side activities either. Karaoke bars, street races, and hunting down collectibles like jade statues all add flavor to the experience. They're the kind of distractions that feel rewarding, not like filler. Sure, Sleeping Dogs might not have been the most hyped game of its era, but it's aged like fine wine. The definitive edition even gave the visuals a nice boost, making the already gorgeous Hong Kong skyline look even sharper. If you haven't revisited this one, do yourself a favor. It's an open world classic that still punches above its weight.